Director, Sanem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's my privilege to sit with you, with two eminent economists here, Professor Wati Mahmood, Professor Rehan Sohan, the same guys. And I think many of us who are here today will also feel the privilege to participate in this particular session. So here, I actually these two economists, they don't really need any kind of introduction, and I don't really want to spend any time on that. So what we do here, this session, this is the conference speech, and we have these two eminent speakers here. I would request both sides to speak for around 25 minutes at the beginning. We'll start with Professor Wati Mahmood, and then I'll move to Professor Rehan Sohan, and then we'll have a Q&A. So and let's see how we progress. We also know that we were late, but we'll also extend the time to accommodate both these eminent speakers' intervention on the very important story. So we start with Professor Wati.
Okay. Thank you. Exactly in between good morning and good afternoon. Okay, let me speak about this question growing against the tide. I think which is the same as the conference theme, which is building resilience to shock. So, to me, it's the same thing. And good to see all of you. And it's good to see that SANEM and its annual conferences are very much alive and kicking at a time when the SAEC and SAEC have become quite dysfunctional. So congratulations to SANEM, Salim and his team. The conference is, I think, when it's mentioned to shock, presumably it refers to the crisis in the global economy created first due to the COVID pandemic and then due to the Russian-Ukraine war that has unfortunately has become an economic war as well. The immediate outlook for the new year for the global economy is not as bad as has been predicted before. So we may be optimistic about turning the corner, but I think the doomsayers need to be heeded as well. The immediate outlook is not that bad because the Chinese economy is opening up. The industrialized West is adjusting itself to the new realities. And the global economic recession does no longer seem inevitable. So that's what the global perspective, which remains uncertain. And our Minister, Dr. Shamsil Alam, may be right that Bangladesh is not that much in a difficult situation, given the global economic situation. The question is, how are our economies, I mean the countries in the South Asia, which is our domain, how these economies are coping, and what lessons we have learned to prepare ourselves for such a global crisis in future, and the way global economy is now behaving. I mean, led by the international financial corporations and dominated by multinationals. This sort and the different forms of pandemic which may be coming. So these sort of crises, we should be prepared in future that these sort of crises may occur even more frequently than before. Okay, in our region, India is doing well in spite of the large drawdown on its huge foreign reserve. It had huge foreign reserve for the cushion. Sri Lanka and Pakistan seem to be to continue to be in trouble, and Bangladesh is what should we say? It's coping somehow. Although high inflation is making life difficult for the poor and newly poor. One immediate lesson for the future is that we need more coping power in terms of having a sufficient foreign exchange reserves, although I speak it from the benefit of hindsight, I should admit, and to have more fiscal space to be able to stimulate the economy and strengthen social security measures at difficult times. At such times, the government may have to resort to deficit financing on a large scale, which Bangladesh has done to an extent. And other countries have also resorted to deficit financing, but that creates excessive monetary expansion, which may exacerbate both inflation and balance of payments problem. In this respect, among the South Asian countries, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka both have a problem with revenue GDP ratio around only 10% or even less. Regarding a safe amount of foreign reserves, the generally prescribed IMF criterion of defining adequate foreign reserves in terms of a given months of equivalent of import needs, 6 months, or what is the standard IMF thing? 3.5. Yeah, okay. But this has to be considered in light of the specific country situation, like the nature of the traded items and the prospective volatility of global markets in those items, the forecast of debt repayment obligations, and not just the current GDP. This is important, forecast, not current debt GDP ratio, and the country's food security needs and so on. All these vary across countries, so there is no one formula for that. This much of foreign reserves is okay. We have seen that a buildup of reserves may lead to complacency. I think in Bangladesh that has happened. For example, in the government was tempted to commit a significant portion of its reserve to project funding, forgetting that foreign reserves should not be treated as budgetary resources, but only as a cushion for unforeseeable external shocks. We should be aware of another miscalculation. Even if the current debt GDP ratio may not have crossed the red line, a debt repayment crisis nevertheless may be in the offing. If there is too many mega infrastructure projects being taken up through foreign funding without an understanding of whether such projects will attract enough private investment, especially in export-oriented industries. And this you can, that is the purpose of any infrastructure project, that you can attract investment, especially foreign investment of export-oriented nature, so that you can automatically have capacity to pay. At this time, at the same time, we should remember that mega projects once started needed to be completed in time, since a delay in implementation is hugely costly to the economy. That's why one has to be, that's why mega projects need very careful scrutiny in terms of timing, financial commitments, cost recovery, and prioritization. Just going for any project that looks prestigious, that maybe looks even important, for which suppliers' credit is available, irrespective of priorities and future debt financing obligations, that's simply not the way to go. Coping with shocks needs careful coordination of fiscal, monetary, and exchange rate countries and management policies to restore external, fiscal, and aggregate supply demand balances. Economic bureaucrats, I don't think there are any here. Economic bureaucrats in the government may become too complacent when the going is good, content with a policy status quo, or advance some incremental policy adjustments. It may not be realized that a coordinated policy approach needs more in-depth analysis and expert advice. The IMF, the thing for the bureaucrats is that the IMF prescriptions often work as a default mode to lean back to, forgetting that those prescriptions may not be informed by country-specific situations, which again, for example, take the case of fuel prices. The sudden hikes in international fuel prices have been the trigger for the current global economic crisis. The usual IMF prescription of aligning domestic prices to global prices is generally a good idea because subsidies on fuel can be very burdensome for the government's budget and can be justified only if targeted to very specific groups and for specific purposes like fuel needs for irrigation by small farmers. But a very sharp and sudden hike in domestic fuel prices may also lead to price increase across the board at a time when there is already inflationary pressure in the economy. The problem is exacerbated if the government has to rely heavily on fuel taxes for revenue purposes, as is the case in Bangladesh, where VAT on fuel is an important source of revenue. Now, in principle, VAT is a tax on consumption and should be imposed on intermediate goods, should not be imposed on intermediate goods as a matter of, sometimes we have to do that as a matter of expediency only. But a universal intermediate input like fuel should not be a major source of VAT revenue collection. In fact, we can calculate that if VAT on fuel could be waived, there would have been hardly any need for the last year's sudden fuel price hike in Bangladesh. Then again, after years of complacency about global food prices, the present crisis has been a reminder that there should be a renewed emphasis on food security in terms of investments in agricultural research and extension, food storage, and public food distribution programs, which were very important in the past, but not that much in the one problem of taking timely decision in anticipation of any impending shock is that none of the policy alternatives look attractive. This is a characteristic of a crisis situation. None of the policy alternatives are that much attractive. So it's often a case of choosing a policy that will lead to the least adverse outcome. The necessary policy adjustments may thus be, because of this, may be postponed because of the temptation for macroeconomic populism or pressure from vested interests or sheer business as usual type inertia. For example, in Bangladesh, we could have let Taka depreciate at a moderate pace to align with the real exchange rate and build up even more respectable foreign reserves when the going was good. Now, faced with a huge current account deficit, we have a dilemma of either to let the exchange rate take a huge plunge, which will exacerbate domestic inflation, further hurting the poor, or to take the extraordinary measure of rationing the opening of LCs for imports, which is bound to be rather chaotic and is clearly in violation of the policy of current account convertibility of Taka, a policy which he accepted in the early 2000s, and I was very involved at the time in the taking up that policy. Again, to help businesses recover in the aftermath of COVID crisis, we introduced caps in the lending rates of banks, but we now find it difficult in the face of opposition from business groups to ease the interest rate cap in the interest of economic stabilization. Note that the IMF will usually advise complete liberalization of interest rates. I'm not sure they have advised it this time. But that is based on textbook logic of optimal allocation of resources, and we are familiar with the debate against the argument against financial repression, which was practiced at the time of post-structural adjustment, pre-structural adjustment era. But there is another side of the problem in a weak banking system, ridden with willful loan default repellents, and which is ignored by international agencies, which is that the interest rates may be driven up too high by those unscrupulous borrowers who take loans with the very understanding of being able to get interest waivers, and or simply to be able to get away without loan repayment. For them, interest rate doesn't matter. Or when after all the rescheduling, the real interest rate will be quite low. Even Bangladesh Bank doesn't calculate those interest rates, which may be even negative in terms of real rates. For relaxing the interest rate caps, that's why relaxing the caps is a good idea, but one should be cautious and it could be done step by step. Another important lesson is that a weak financial system is always a problem of economic management, but much more so at times of economic shocks. A banking system already burdened with huge portfolios of non-performing loans is simply equipped to handle the government's economic recovery packages, and such as was delivered at the time of the COVID crisis. Even a more serious problem is that a weakly governed financial system is unable to prevent illegal capital flight abroad that are likely to take place at times of economic uncertainty. The overall lesson here is that there is need for an active, capable, and pragmatic government with sufficient institutional capabilities. So you don't damage the institutional capacities. That's very important. To absorb shocks and ensure a soft landing, the voting policies have to be clever and nimble, and informed by adequate analysis and information, even in a general environment of deficient governance, which our countries have, there must be at least some key government agencies that are well-resourced and professionally competent and able to identify problems and work out solutions and act promptly. Let me now come to the last point. We need to consider the decline in the global economic governance and the rise of regional trade agreements. Bangladesh has not done much yet. Vietnam has 30 or more already regional or even bilateral trade agreements. Due to the Russian-Ukraine war, there is also a realignment in the global geopolitical arrangements. This means that we are not going back to the pre-crisis global economic order. We definitely need to re-emphasize South-South trade cooperation arrangements, given that FTA is now almost defunct. It's sometimes argued that our types of countries, say India, Bangladesh, have the same list of potential export items. So how can we have a trade within ourselves? But we forget that there's still much unexploited potential for intra-sectoral trade. We may be exporting the same items, but within those items, there may be scope for developing regional supply chains. For example, even in ready-made garments, where competitive advantage in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh are very different in the supply chains. Of course, no regional trade blocks are yet even nearly self-sufficient. So exploiting the whatever opportunities are available from the economic globalization, that should remain important. Now there we have now multiple regional economic powerhouses. That's another reality now. India being one of those. For Bangladesh, the country can potentially benefit from being strategically positioned in the neighborhood of two economic powerhouses, India and China. But it has to negotiate its way cleverly without being sandwiched by the opposing pressure coming from those two giants. Clearly, in the new realigned global economy, economic diplomacy has to take a front seat so that my contemporary class friend, Mr. Momen, has quite a task ahead. Let me just end by referring to a few things I just heard from the previous discussion. আমি আলাদা আলাদাভাবে দু একটি কথা বলছি। আমাদের মাননীয় অর্থমন্ত্রী অর্থ প্রতিমন্ত্রী খুবই আমাদের শামসুল্লাহ সাহেব পরিকল্পনা মন্ত্রী আমাদের খুবই প্রিয় লোক, সচেতন ব্যক্তি। কিন্তু একটি কথা যেটা উনি বোধহয় নাই এখন, কিন্তু এটা জানা উচিত আমাদের, যে উনি বলেছিলেন যে শিক্ষা এবং স্বাস্থ্য খাতে আমাদের শিক্ষা খাতে আমরা মাত্র জিডিপি 2% ব্যয় করি, কিন্তু তাতে কি আমাদের তো বেসরকারি খাতাতে সব মিলিয়ে শিক্ষা খাতে ব্যয় তো বেশি হবে। এটা বলা ঠিক না। তার কারণ হলো একে তো আমরা দক্ষিণ এশিয়ায় ভারত, শ্রীলঙ্কা, নেপাল সব দেশেরই শাসনতন্ত্রের মধ্যেই পরিষ্কারভাবে সমাজতন্ত্র লেখা আছে। শিক্ষার সুযোগ এটা সবাই জন্য সুযোগ, ন্যায্য সুযোগ, মেধাভিত্তিক সুযোগ নিশ্চিত করতে হলে সরকারি ব্যয়ের বিকল্প নাই। বেসরকারি খাত পরিপূরক ভূমিকা হিসাবে কাজ করতে পারে, কিন্তু প্রধান ভূমিকা হিসাবে না। আমাদের আমাদের দেশীয় এটা বিদেশিরা শোনা উচিত এবং এই প্রসঙ্গে এটি বলা উচিত যে আমি এখনই মনে করছি যেটা যে উন্নত দেশগুলোতে সরকারি ব্যয় শিক্ষা ব্যয় না সরকারি শিক্ষা ব্যয় জিডিপি অনুপাতে উন্নত সবগুলো দেশে যুক্তরাষ্ট্র 5, 6, 7% মতো আমাদের প্রতিবেশী ভারত এবং নেপাল এর শিক্ষা ব্যয় সরকারি শিক্ষা ব্যয় জিডিপি চীন এবং ভিয়েতনামের সমান জিডিপি 4% মতো কিন্তু আমার শ্রীলঙ্কা আগে ভালো ছিল এখন শ্রীলঙ্কা আর বাংলাদেশ জিডিপি মাত্র 2% খরচকারের শিক্ষা খাতে এই শিক্ষা খাত দিয়ে আমরা সমাজতান্ত্রিক শিক্ষা খাতের উদ্দেশ্য পূরণ করতে পারবো সবাই সমান অধিকার উচ্চ শিক্ষার জন্য এবং ভালো প্রাথমিক শিক্ষার জন্য আর IMF এর কিছু কথা বলা হয়েছে যে আমাকে ইয়ে বললো স্পিকার আমাদের ex-IMF হাসান আমার খুব প্রিয় ছাত্র বললো যে IMF যা দিচ্ছে এটা খুব বাংলাদেশ আসলেই দিত কাজেই তেমন বেশি শর্ত বেশি আরোপ করেনি তা ঠিকই কাগজে কলমে বেশি শর্ত আরোপ করেনি যেমন বলা হয়েছে খেলাপি ঋণ কমিয়ে আনতে হবে বাবা খেলাপি ঋণ কি IMF কমিয়ে আনতে পারবে কিন্তু আমি বহু দশক ধরে দেখেছি ব্যাংকিং সেক্টরের বহু কমিশন করেছি খেলাপি ঋণ কাগজে কলমে সই করলো আর খেলাপি ঋণ কমে যাবে এটা সম্পূর্ণভাবে রাজনীতি এবং এটাকে শর্ত হিসাবে ধরে তো কোনো লাভ হবে না IMF সেটা নিজেও IMF একটা ব্যুরোক্রেসি আছে তাদেরও সামলাতে তারা কাগজে কলমে দেখা হ্যাঁ বাংলাদেশ রাজি হচ্ছে যে খেলাপি ঋণ কমাবে এটা রাজস্ব জিডিপি একই কাগজে কলমে দেখানো হলো যে IMF আমলাতন্ত্র খুশি হলো আমরা খুশি হলাম যে জিডিপি রাজস্ব জিডিপি বাড়ানো হলো এত%। এটাও সম্পূর্ণভাবে কিছুটা আমাদের প্রাতিষ্ঠানিক যে আর্থিক ব্যবস্থা অলরেডি এখন হঠাৎ করে করা কঠিন হবে কিন্তু এটাও রাজনৈতিক সিদ্ধান্ত সুদের হারের ব্যাপারটা রিজার্ভের পরিমাণ এটাও IMF বলবে কিন্তু খুব ভালো করেই জানে যে এটাকার এক্সিজেন্সিস কি এবং সেগুলো পূরণ করতে গেলে যেটা রিজার্ভের বেলায় বলা হয়নি তোমরা অনেকে আলোচনা করোনি রিজার্ভে যে গত বছর $8 বিলিয়ন কমে গিয়েছিল তার মধ্যে কিন্তু যেটা যোগ করা হয়নি সেটা হলো যে এক্সপোর্টারদের যে একটা কোটা আছে ERQ বলে এক্সপোর্টার এই কোটাগুলো কিন্তু খরচ করে ফেলা আছে এটা রিজার্ভের ভিতরে না কিন্তু তবু এগুলো খরচ করে ফেলা আছে $8 বিলিয়ন থেকেও বেশি কিন্তু যে কারণে এখন ব্যাংকগুলো যেহেতু ওই কোটার টাকাগুলো নাই সেজন্য ব্যাংকগুলো এখন অসুবিধায় পড়ছে যে এলসি করতে পারছে না আগে তাহলে একটা প্রবাহ ছিল এক্সপোর্টারদের আর কি আসতো আবার সেটাকে ব্যবহার করা হতো এখানে আমি জাস্ট একটা কথা বলি যে এই যে রিজার্ভের পরিমাণ কত বলা হয় এটাও এই পরিমাণ তো আমাদের আগের কালে তো $3 বিলিয়ন ছিল এক সময় পরিমাণটা বড় কথা নয় বড় কথা হলো প্রবণতা 1 বছরে 2 বছরে কত কমে যাচ্ছে এখন 1 বছরে যদি $8 বিলিয়ন বা তার থেকেও বেশি কমে তার মানে হলো এই প্রবণতা চলতে দেওয়া যাবে না কিন্তু প্রবণতা একবার শুরু হলে এটা ঠেকানো বিশৃঙ্খল ভাবে ঠেকানো যায় এলসি গুলো জোর করে বন্ধ করে দিয়ে কিন্তু একটা নিয়ম নীতি মতো প্রবণতা গুলো শেখানো আমাদের মতো আমদানির মধ্যে সেখানে অনেক কথা বলে ফেলেছি আমাকে এই সুযোগ দেওয়ার জন্য খুবই ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে এবং সানিকে বিশেষ করে সেলিমকে বিশেষ করে আমার খুব সুযোগ্য ছাত্র এবং আমাকে কিছু হলেই ডাকে আমি সব এই ব্যাপারে যখন আমার কোনো প্রস্তুতি ছিল না আমি বললাম আমার তো কোনো প্রস্তুতি নেই সেলিম বললাম আপনার আবার প্রস্তুতি কি আমি জানতে বলে
Thank you so much, sir. I think we had a very rich deliberation from Professor Warren. And he identified the structure issue, the structural problems, and he offered some solutions to. And I think we'll definitely this will definitely encourage some questions to be raised during the Q&A session. So it's my privilege now to request Professor Remas to share his views with us.
Thank you, Sri, for once again inviting me to SAEC conference. I have been attending these for quite a number of years, and it was particularly exciting because we bring together not just a younger audience, but also a more diversified audience from around the region. There are colleagues who have now come in from the region. I welcome you, including those who might be plugged in online. I understand that parts of Sri Lanka and Pakistan are plugged in online. I've gone through the list of papers being presented. Again, they are interesting. It represents regionally a diverse research agenda in which a number of papers touch on the thematic focus of the conference. I will look forward to reading some of them. In fact, it would be useful if I could have read some of them before I gave my remarks today. Now, the focus of the conference is building resilience to crops, priorities, challenges, and prospects. Now, the problem with crops is that when you actually talk of crops, you tend to think of them as essentially short-term phenomena. And you then tend to design responses which deal with short-term phenomena. But what you have to recognize is that a number of shocks are actually originating in deep-seated features, both of the global system and within the domestic economy. And therefore, when you are wanting to build resilience, it is best to recognize this and to build resilience to cope with the longer term implications of shocks which are embedded systemically in the global and national system. In a 25-minute presentation, I don't think I would have the time to fully address this, nor in fact actually would I have the competence to fully address it. So I will be drawing your attention. I have the more gray-haired members of the audience who initiate research, and I have this great constituency of younger people. And what I would be interested in is to influence your own research priorities in relation to some of the issues that I'm going to put on the table, so that you can take these up and address the issues which I'm raising more substantially. Now, I will essentially focus on four sets of issues. The first will address the macroeconomic shocks, so-called, within its more longer-term implications. The second will address the sort of priorities which should be guiding Bangladesh, both in relation to investment and its policy agendas. The third will relate to actually the governance of both our macroeconomic agendas and our priorities, because at the end of the day, whatever policies you may put on the table they have to be implemented and how effectively they are implemented is profoundly related to the nature of governance, the nature of your institutions, and above all, the nature of the democratic process, which is integral to the processes of accountability and transparency, which are the underlying pillars of good government. And finally, I would like to address the regional dimensions of shocks and the global dimensions of shocks. I'm happy that Wahid has already drawn attention to this, but there are some profound seismic changes going on in the global economy, to which we have to address ourselves, and how we position ourselves will be of great importance to our future. Now, part of our address of these issues is obviously influenced by the fact that we are very sensibly also prioritizing some important issues of the future. The commitment to build a smart Bangladesh is the Prime Minister and the government are really commended on identifying this as a critical element of their future pathway. But what I think you should all recognize is that smart Bangladesh cannot be an end in itself. It is actually merely an instrument. And it is an instrument made available to us through the rapid advances in technology. And these instruments can now be deployed for addressing longer term issues. Now, looking, for example, at the macroeconomic trends which have been creating some concern and the responses to them. Now, obviously, these are all very short term, and as has been effectively pointed out, whether you are really talking about growing budgetary deficits, the reduction in reserves, the nature of balance of payments, the broader issues of sustaining long-term growth. All of these issues may have short-term implications relating whether to COVID or to Ukraine, but how you respond to them really depends on the structures you have built within the economy. Now, my colleagues who are sitting in the panel, I'm sure, will address a number of these issues, so I don't want to elaborate on that. I will make just a few brief remarks. One, of course, is the nature of the financing of the development process. Now, the traditional macroeconomic responses, which have now been projected in the IMF reform agenda, which they have presented to us, and the conditionalities associated with it, tend to put emphasis on limiting the size of the budget deficit. Now, the IMF, for most countries, tends to come up with the belief that figures in the range of 4 to 6 or 7% seem to be about the limit to which deficit financing could go. Now, these figures are somehow presented as a sort of hadith from the agency, which I have never quite understood, because economies are different, their structures are different, and their capacity to absorb deficits created through debt creation vary very greatly. And where our research has been very deficient, in Bangladesh, certainly, I cannot speak for my Indian colleagues, the fact that we don't really know what are the drivers of inflationary pressures which may be created by accumulating deficits. Obviously, much will really depend on how how public expenditure resources flow into the economy, in which segments it stimulates demand, the capacity available in those segments to respond to it, so that you may get into a situation where there are significant underutilized capacities built into the economy, where then injection of budgetary expenditure may actually stimulate these areas, which will actually be growth inducing and not necessarily create inflationary pressure. Now, where these opportunities exist is really a matter of deep research. And I think this is a great deficiency in our research community, that we have not really looked at the structural sources of inflation and the nature of and the capacity for addressing these issues through deficit financing. Now, the other issue which has been unsatisfactorily addressed, I believe, is the whole problem then of the nature of our growing balance of payments deficits and the impact it is having on our reserves. Now, here we obviously are going to face in any period of time, given our participation in a given global trading regime, problems relating to sustaining of our exports. Obviously, for an economy where 80% of the exports originate in a single commodity, and these are then massively directed to two regions of the European Union and North America, we are highly vulnerable to shocks which originate outside our control in the growth dynamics and also the policy regimes governing the growth dynamics of these particular regions. So how you react to it will really depend on how we engage with the changes in the global economy, and I will address this in conclusion. The issue, similarly, of our other major source of earnings, our migrants, is again both a measure of our limitations as policymakers and our weak governance, as also in the way in which we have actually addressed what is the major resource of Bangladesh, which is the people of Bangladesh. Now, question you will have to ask yourself is that for a country which is having 8% growth and which claims to have also rapidly reduced poverty, which they have actually done, if you are looking at the numbers, why are so many people compelled to risk life and limb to go to the most remote corners of the world in order to earn their livelihood? Obviously, there should be some correlation between the health of the domestic economy and this whole compulsion of migrating at great cost and risk to travel abroad. Now, what I would therefore say is that the way we perceive the role of migration should move away from the whole Adam Bepari vision that you have got traders who are trafficking people abroad and exploiting their vulnerabilities, and that this has become a major source of foreign exchange earnings for Bangladesh for the last, I would say, what is it, close to now 35 years. And the fact that we have not recalibrated our approach to how effectively we utilize this resource is a major deficiency in the way in which we both manage our economy and the way in which we address the people in whose name we manage the economy. Now, what I would, for example, like to envisage in a smart Bangladesh, targeting 2041, is the fact that we have people who will want to go abroad, but not out of economic compulsion. not out of desperation, but they will go abroad as legitimate suppliers of services in the global economy, where significant structural gaps will be emerging around the world, because as populations age around the world, there are going to be significant demand for services. And what Bangladesh should be targeting by 2041 is a country which is committed to the export of services, where the people who go abroad are then both trained, educated, brought collectively into institutional structures, which then negotiate with the buyers of services around the world to export these services. And so the exploitative nature of the migrant process, the risks associated with it, and above all, the potential for value added are fully realized from this redesigning of the migration process, which is one of our major resources. Now, moving on from here, what should be the way in which we address priorities in relation to this in terms of our expenditure needs? Now, as far as the macroeconomy is concerned, much really depends, its health depends on the types of expenditures we make and the long-term growth potential generated from this, and appreciation of the opportunity costs of the respective areas in which we have expenditure. Now, this government commendably again put emphasis on infrastructure. Actually, I had the unique experience yesterday. For the first time, I had the opportunity to actually drive across the Podda Bridge, and it was an exhilarating experience, which gave me a sense of pride and an appreciation of our Prime Minister's leadership quality. But then, as I drove across it and back with this huge investment which this implied, with the huge technological advances which were inherent in constructing such a structure, it struck me that similar priorities could be put in other areas of the economy. I had the privilege of addressing the centenary celebrations of Dhaka University, where the Prime Minister was present. And in her presence, I pointed out that she should be commended for the emphasis she put on the construction of the Podda Bridge. But at the centenary of Dhaka University, which was once reputedly the Oxford of the East, perhaps a similar priority should be put by her on the regeneration of Dhaka University, so that it would once again become a world-class university, and all that may require, both in terms of expenditure priorities and the quality of governance for utilizing those resources. And the proposition which really arises from that is that there are a range of priorities, both in relation to education and healthcare, which are no less important than the infrastructure that we are constructing. Whether you compute your priorities in terms of rates of return, or whether you compute it in terms of social priorities, the ability to provide quality healthcare, the ability to provide quality education at all levels in every citizen of Bangladesh should certainly be one of our major priorities. Now, what are the issues inherent in that? Because whilst Bangladesh again should be commended, we have improved our HD indicators in getting almost 100% enrollment in primary education and getting female enrollments. What we have not managed to achieve is improvements in quality. And certainly quality leaves so much to be desired that in terms of even the global indicators for measuring education quality, we do not even figure in the country indicators which are there. And the few studies which I've seen, which have been done by Kempe, indicate huge gaps in terms of reading, writing, and understanding in both math and in written material. So this will require both, again, major investment priorities. The numbers have been suggested by Wahid. It's the targets we should be aimed at. But even if we raise our expenditure shares in health and education to 6% or whatever it is, this will be neither here nor there if we have not substantively improved quality, the management. We have corrected the inherent corruption which has been sort of built into the public educational system. And above all, we address the profound disequalizing impact which we have in which you have a divided health and education system between a public and a private sector, which is dividing society between a educated elite and a, profoundly undereducated mass. In the growth implications of providing the mass of the population with the same levels of education that you are getting in cadet colleges in Bangladesh would have both growth and distributive implications, which we should all recognize. Now, this brings me to the most important implication of macroeconomic policy, promoting greater equity. Now, for all our growth, for all our levels of poverty reduction that we have achieved, everyone would recognize that inequality in Bangladesh has been increasing, not just in Bangladesh, in many countries around the world. Now, if we had the privilege of having the planning minister with us, someone has no doubt educated himself about the Kuznets curve, whatever that might actually mean. But essentially, I suppose he would be advised perhaps by Shamsul Alam that the Kuznets curve is merely a sort of descriptive explanation of state of expenditure of GDP measurements which happened maybe a century ago. In the 21st century, you do not take a Kuznets curve as a sort of God-given number. It is actually something which is achieved through the nature of the policies which you actually have. And Bangladesh's policies have remained profoundly disequalizing. And I think essentially, if you are wanting to address the resilience of an economy, then you have to address the disequalizing implications of public expenditure and policy, because this essentially has a very profound impact both on the state of your democracy and on the state of your economy. Because effectively, progressively widening disparity points to a disenfranchisement, both economic and political, of a broad segment of the population who can again be the major drivers of growth in the economy. I will simply ask you to imagine a situation in which you had created the policies and investments whereby the productivity of our small farmers, who have been the drivers of agricultural growth, could be approximated to Chinese levels. I would ask you to visualize a situation in which the value which they add could be more equitably shared, rather than every year when you are facing a situation where bumper crops are then being provided by farmers, but then they are complaining of getting inadequate prices. And when you come to the market in Dhaka, you are then finding a progressive and unexplained growth of prices. Now, here again, I think there is a sort of research failure, because no one has adequately addressed the whole driving measures of inflation in retail markets over here. I personally tend to feel that the laws of supply and demand don't seem to work in the workings of our retail markets. But no one has applied their mind to it as far as I can see. Why do prices rise and fall suddenly? Are they driven by supply and demand forces, or are there particular features in the nature of the marketing mechanism and the capacity for collusive action within that mechanism which are creating these issues? So these issues could be addressed. Now, within the context of this emerging and growing inequalities, we should address the policy regime. These are not merely the outcome of the dynamics of the growth process. Much really depends on how the growth process is structured and driven by policy. Now, take for instance the default crisis. Now, basically, the tendency is to look at this as a banking problem, which of course it is, because it has created a major problem in terms of the functioning and governance of your banking system, which has long-term consequences if you do not really have a stable and well-functioning financial system. But what essentially is built into the debt crisis is its profound desequalizing implications and the inherent injustice of the system. Now, I don't know how many of you have addressed this, but today, basically, the banking system and the provision of debt is really driven by the commercial banks. Once upon a time, they were driven by specialized financial institutions, which have gone bankrupt some time ago. But now what is happening is that commercial banks and some non-bank institutions are basically attracting deposits from millions and millions of people around the country. And particularly in the commercial banks, these are short-term deposits of the common citizens of Bangladesh. And these are then being channeled into long-term debt for term borrowing by the borrower. Now, were these to be turned into productive investments, that was good. I mean, the deposits of your ordinary people would then be secure and giving them some return. In actual practice, that has not been happening. Debt flows have been highly concentrated. There has been a high level of default, particularly in the highest tier of the debt flows within the system. And you need to take into account that this then has become a major transfer of resources from ordinary depositors of limited means to a certain elite business community, which through its political power and its influence has been able to avoid meeting their obligations. So what does it mean? It means essentially that huge resource transfers, instrumentalized and promoted by now public policy, has actually been contributing to the desequalization of our society. When, for example, someone is given a loan at a given interest, he does not repay, it is then rescheduled and it is advanced over another 10 years, or in many cases, interest is written down and also even written off. It represents a huge subsidy to that person. And also within the competitive system, it has a profoundly de-competitive implication. Because it means that some people who pay their loans are paying one rate of interest, and those who do not pay their loans, or those who default on it, or those who have it rescheduled, actually are getting a effectively much lower rate of interest. So even in the functioning of the capitalist system, it is a profoundly desequalizing factor. But socially, it is even more so. Now, the day a government through Bangladesh Bank, and the Bangladesh Bank is not an autonomous institution, it is merely an instrument of the Ministry of Finance, actually takes the decision that they will permit further rescheduling, and the recent ones were if you pay 2% down payment, you will then get another 10 years to repay the loans. These are effective transfers of resources of ordinary people to a handful of people who have the privilege and capacity to default on their loans with impunity. Now, this is a profoundly unjust arrangement, and it's not only bad. It's not only bad for banking; it is bad even for competitive capitalism, and certainly it is unacceptable arrangement in society. Finally, on this particular point, I would say that the outcomes of growing inequality have to be adequately taken care of. Now, here I have profound problems with you researchers, including Sonia, that you do all your assessments of inequality and design your Gini coefficients simply by looking at the household expenditure surveys. But actually, if you look at the way in which the tiers of expenditure are channeled, and you look at the topmost tier, probably that is the level at which many people may be actually paying their chauffeurs. And these are people regarded as the highest tiers of the expenditure ceiling. But the bulk of the top ceilings of household expenditure are not covered because the people with the highest levels of income will not let an enumerator even enter their gates. And of course, a lot of them have their income abroad. And that obviously is not accessible to the system. So were you as researchers and even as investigators to actually redesign the way in which inequalities could be measured, you would be making a major both economic and social contribution. But it will help us to move away from the illusion that we have got, even though our Gini coefficients have deteriorated, that we are somewhere in the region of 0.4 rather than 0.7. It could certainly be a relevant matter of concern. All these issues end up with the issue of governance and how you are managing the system. And essential to good governance is a working system of accountability and transparency within the system. Now, the driving forces of an accountable system are a democratic society in which those who are engaged in governance will be periodically held accountable to the people of the country for their stewardship of the economy. And the people of the country should be having the right to freely cast their vote without threat of force, without having to face the fact that large sums of money may be spent in order to win their allegiance. And in that way, a proper system of accountability will be made to work. So obviously the nature and extent of the democratic process, its manifestation through a functioning free media, its functioning through an active civil society are important instruments determining the quality of governance. Correspondingly, the transparency of the system is very important. Here, Smart Bangladesh could provide an enormous scope for building transparency into the system. I mean, the Bangladesh I envision for 2041, 2041 as part of a smart Bangladesh with huge advances in smart ICT technology, would be a society in which every household in Bangladesh, and I hope that by then everyone would have their own homes, would actually be ICT provision. And that sitting at home, you will then be able to track all public expenditure. If in fact there is bidding going on for a huge infrastructure project, how that bidding takes place, who are the bidders, who are their local collaborators, the decision-making process, and finally then the progression of how it is being spent and implemented. All that information should be available to households sitting in Dinashpur by logging in on their IT provisions. Correspondingly, all government files should in fact be made into a public resource. I mean, there will obviously be some reservations of national security, but national security should be recognized as what constitutes national security. And the fact that a person will go into the health ministry, as has recently been seen in the case of Rosina, in order to access information on what has been going on, and then should then be mistreated and then even jailed, and then charged on account of national security is of course absurdity. So we need to both re-legislate our laws relating to national security, and for the wide area of information, which is the birthright of every citizen, you should be able to log in and see what is happening in every file in the government. And if you are yourself a client and you want to know what has happened, you should be able to know what has happened by logging in on your computer. So that is the vision I have of a smart governance process, which actually projects complete transparency. Lastly, let me come down. Have I overstepped my time? Okay, sorry. I will say very briefly. What has actually happened now is that profound structural changes have taken place in the global economy. The major structural change that has taken place has been the rise of Asia and the progressive depreciation in the economic strength of the West. Now, this could normally be seen as a smooth process, but it is not a smooth process. It is seen now in the West as a grave threat to their future, including their security. And so it is the West which has now initiated the process of deglobalization, and the United States, which is now returning to an era of protectionism and import substitution, which was promoted initially by Alexander Hamilton at in the last quarter of the 18th century, in the period after their independence. Now, for Bangladesh, this structural change in the economy, and now what is happening has been the weaponization of the global trading system, has become a problem we need to recognize. Today, the real problem arising from the Ukraine war is the fact that the United States and the EU have chosen to actually weaponize trade and economic interactions, which then may be okay if you are wanting to fight an economic war with Russia on the issue of Ukraine, but it is impacted on all the other countries of the world. And this weaponization has now meant that in all issues where the political and security interests of people who once used to be the major players of the global economy are affected, you are actually going to use the pressure of economic sanctions in one way or the other to compel behavior which is not at all acceptable or in the interest of a great majority of countries. Now, this means that you need to address such a world, and for us, it means that we also have to see that what is now happening is that you are not participating in a traditional global regime where what you may call globalization operating through the working of market forces is working as it was supposed to work. So you will now have a situation in which you will be expected to conduct yourself in a particular way. You will have to relate yourself to other countries who may be strategic partners against whom you have to compete in that market, and you will be competing under different trading regimes. Now, this means that we should address that. In fact, I have advised my colleagues that they are now periodically invited to India, who is now going to host the next G20 meeting. And I was hoping that they would persuade our Indian colleagues to take the lead in addressing this issue of the weaponization of the global economy and to see whether you can get back to a situation where countries who want to trade and operate freely can do so without being exposed to the strategically driven pressure of some of the global powers. Last point is that the implications for this and the implications for the changing restructuring of the global system, where the new drivers of growth, the new centers of growth dynamics are now located in Asia, particularly centered around our two giant neighbors, should really be a major source of both economic diplomacy and restructuring for Bangladesh. Now, we are fortunately or unfortunately now bound in a given system where our main markets are in the United States and rather North America, the EU. Now, common sense and economic logic could mean that we should really be putting major emphasis on both diversifying our export capacity and diversifying our markets. Now, these are issues of diplomacy and particularly economic diplomacy. So, whilst the growth of Southeast Asia and East Asia has been driven by the strong value chains which have been constructed with China, however, we have to keep in mind that today China's main trading partner is actually Southeast and East Asia, not North America and Europe. And that applies also to the Southeast Asians and East Asians, where not just the region, but for most of the countries, including countries like Japan, Taiwan itself, and Korea, have China as their main trading partner. So we need to correspondingly plug into these value chains and to see how India itself, our principal partner and neighbor, can in fact actually construct the same value chains which China has managed to construct with its immediate neighbors around the region. I mean, the big weakness of South Asian economic cooperation is that over almost a sort of 20-year period, the value chains still remain profoundly underdeveloped and nowhere near as comparable as the value chains China has developed. So these are research issues for all of you. These are also issues for economic and political diplomacy. And these are issues, I think, for the more senior and experienced economists to really address over here. So with these words, I apologize for overstaying my time. I mean, when you get to be my age, you tend to forget time and you tend to speak far longer than is tolerable to most audiences. But thank you very much.
Thank you. We actually had the opportunity of listening to Professor Ramaswamy on a very wide range of issues. And thank you so much, sir. So we can take a few questions and comments. Anyone would like to? Because of the time constraint, probably will restrict 3 max. I will take. First, I'll take a new one, new hand, and then yes, please. Yes, there. If you can just share your question.
Thank you very much. My question is to specifically Dr. Raymond Soban.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Chandrakuri William. I'm a student of the University of Dhaka, Department of International Relations. I'm a master's student. So my question was that Bangladesh has been a major purchase of electricity from India. And we know that Bangladesh Power Development Board has made a deal with the Adani Group to import about 1,490 megawatts of electricity per year. But the fact is that Bangladesh has been providing a capacity charge of like $450 million per year. But the electricity generation has not been produced yet and is already in the progress. So I have raised a question because recently we have seen in the Hindenburg report that Adani Group has been accused of multiple accusations like faulty and taking money. One accused group was like brazen market and manipulation of the accounting. So the fact is that I have already discussed about the decent expenditure of public money. So does it compromise the expenditure of the Bangladesh taxpayers' money on Adani Group? Because Bangladesh has not been provided that electricity yet. And we know that the Adani Group enterprise coal is basic coal based and the final rate cost is about 24.21 takas. But if you produce it locally, it is 15 taka, which is furnace oil. But still the production plants in Bangladesh are not being handled and it has been all the contracts have been given to that group. And we all know that Gautam Adani is one of the richest persons in Bangladesh, but the recent controversy is on the Hindenburg report. Now it looks like compromises the situation of Bangladesh. So why the policymakers took such a drastic step to make this deal?
Thank you. I think next question, please. Yes, who is there? This side, yes. And then Halbhai, I'll come to you.
Thank you. This is Dr. Nahid Sattar from Bangladesh Agricultural University. So I have a question which is more specific to agriculture and food security in terms of the crisis we are seeing. So what is the tide here? In my opinion, the tide we are seeing is rising prices, there is a decline of purchasing power by individuals. And what, in my opinion, this is, we are seeing a creeping crisis. This is not a rapid crisis. So it's not necessarily we are seeing that people are dying without food, but the impact that it is having on people on diet. We might eventually say in 10 years see that there is more of stunting and there is we have a shorter generation teenagers than the previous one. So what I think what needs to be done here is that our food supply chain, there are certain areas which are very import dependent, whether it's commodities like edible oil or onion. But what I'm more concerned about is the backward linkage of the commodities that we produce, which are import dependent, whether it's fertilizer or some feed ingredients. So what I think that we need to focus on safeguarding or building capacities in those areas, in the backward linkages of agricultural commodities, and that would involve cost. That might involve even some degree of protectionism. So my question to the respected panel is, would you support those sort of measures given the sensitivity of the food and agricultural situation? Thank you.
Thank you. You introduced yourself. He's from So Professor Hiller. Yes. Professor Hiller here. Yes.
Hello, I'm in the School of Business and Economics, North-South University. May I just record my deep appreciation for the Professor Whiten, sir, for pointing out that each and every child and citizen has got equal entitlements to government's funding for health and education. And coming from a private university, I must point it out that parents send their children to universities, private schools or universities, but they make a lot of sacrifices on their personal front, and that should be recognized as well, not just the number. Thank you, sir. Coming to the point. So, sir, you mentioned about financial depression, fragmentation, and non-performing loans on the financial space. Previously, we heard about 10% GDP tax ratio, but that number you can interpret in many ways. If you take it to the effective tax payments and then talking about the actual number of GDP, number could go anywhere. But we live with the official number. But that number is underpinned by serious structural problems. A lot of rates, a lot of exemptions, negotiated outcomes, and all that. So come to the question. I mean, to me, it looks like the consequences of this fiscal policy and monetary policy over the years, like a dog's breakfast. Actually, excuse my French on that, but it is. The standard narrative sometimes we hear that these policies are sometimes tweaked or fiddled around to achieve some social objectives and demographic objectives, perhaps. But fiscal policy has got a profound objective to equalize income distribution, some address income distribution, which has been discussed. So given that IMF is giving us an opportunity, should the government, the answer to be yes, should the government take this opportunity to undo many of the band-aid knee-jerk approaches they have taken to fiddle around with monetary policy, fiscal policies, and as a matter of guiding principle, set out some stringent rules to do anything with fiscal policy and monetary policy, and try socially, more targeted policy or measures rather than dealing with these two policies. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So we'll stop here because I'm quite sure that over the lunch you will get the opportunity to talk to these two eminent economists. Because of the time constraint, I'll first look for someone.
If there's any question, then like to
Okay.
please.
Yes, I'll start with a little question. So we can take, I think I saw the hand first, Pahan, and then I'll come to you. Yes, yes, please.
Sir, assalamu alaikum. This is Abdullah from, I'm an undergraduate student of Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. Sir, my question is about Smart Bangladesh. So I would like to draw attention on the fourth industrial revolution. Universities in our country or economic think tanks don't talk too much on this issue. So we are to depend totally on foreign books and papers where we find that millions are going to be jobless due to artificial intelligence, big data, and other huge automation in the production process. So this may also apply for Bangladesh. For example, automation in just the R&D sector will make thousands jobless, and this will affect unemployment, inequality, export, import, and many other macro and micro aspects. So my question is that is something like such dramatic surge in unemployment likely to occur actually after fourth industrial revolution in Bangladesh? And is Bangladesh taking preparation for this? And what we all can collectively do to proceed towards a holistic and comprehensive preparation? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So here, I think you can take this question. Yes, microphone here, please.
Assalamualaikum. My name is India Rasul. I'm with part of Bangladesh Basic Income Network. I have a very simple and easy question. I don't know if Suman sir have heard since like I've been working in the and are we ready for becoming middle income country to go to this? Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, can start with you?
I really don't want to waste time. Though, those who have asked questions, the implicit in the question is the knowledge they already have on those issues. Particularly, Ella knows more than I do on this. And he knows much more than the IMF experts. So, and it's true for other one on agriculture, I can just refer that in our younger days, we did some research. You look at Google Scholar and you'll find some of the issues being discussed there. But again, I will emphasize that the questions embodies the knowledge which the question maker is finding. So I have nothing to add to it. Thank you very much for the interest you have taken in our deliberations.
No, I suffer from a deficiency that I cannot remember anything. I see. So I think the questions which were addressed, perhaps you may quickly rephrase what I could answer or could not answer.
Is it a diplomatic stance that you don't want to answer?
I want to answer every question, but I must remember what you want. One was specifically addressed to me, the first question. Oh, about Adani. Yeah. That issue has been in the papers. I cannot talk about this changing wealth status, but it tells you something actually about the measurement of wealth. I mean, after all, if in a few days, Adani can lose $100 billion, and I presume that the way in which he has been doing his business has not changed, so that on the ground, everything has remained the same. All that has happened in the market has reduced its wealth by $100 billion. Now, that tells you more about the nature of the market rather than Mr. Adani, if you ask me. And people who then sort of measure the world in terms of what the stock market tells you are in fact going to be profoundly deceived about what is happening in the real world. Now, on the issue of Adani Power, if my memory holds good, my long-term memory is better than my short-term memory. I remember the original transaction with Adani was that he was going to actually construct this plant inside Bangladesh, and he was going to bring in coal from his coal mines in India. Presumably, this could also be growth enhancing for the Bangladesh economy because the development would have been in country, and secondly, the cost of supply would be much better. But it seems that he's made major investments in coal mining in Australia. Global market demand has meant that has not turned out to be a very good investment, and that there is significant underutilization in one of the mines that he has. And so coal from that mine is now being shipped to India and then being transshipped from the ports to his mine up to this power plant. And then Bangladesh, under this very peculiar contract we have negotiated with them, is paying both for the mine coal which he is bringing from Australia and also from the transshipment cost. So it is now coming to $400 in dollars, or what I was seeing the figure somewhere, but quite disproportionately high because of the source of supply. So all I can say is that we have obviously not negotiated a very smart deal. And for a country which is aspiring to be smart Bangladesh, I think we can try to be a lot smarter if we can in fact want to enter into a transaction. Mr. Adani has of course got more than just his business acumen to support him in the deals that he makes. And so what elements of the transaction are driven by political variables and what are driven by private interest, we don't really know, but the objective outcome is that this is not a smart deal, and it should certainly be renegotiated.
No. Yes, thank you. Thank you again. Thank the audience for being so patient.
What Bangladesh going to? Well, actually, I'm not quite sure what a middle income country means. It is just a number. Actually, what you need to do is to unpackage the concept of a middle income country. And if you think that it is just a number, well, it will depend on the nature of your GDP accounting and tells you very little about the sort of country we should look like. I would suggest that we should not talk about middle income country. We should talk about just Bangladesh, which has got its capacity to reproduce its own growth and generate its own dynamics in which all people are participating and benefiting from that growth process. That may add up numerically to give you middle income status. It may not, I do not know, nor do I care. But what I would certainly advise you is don't get caught in the numbers game and look at the substance of what is behind those numbers.
Can I just add this? Sir is very right that actually we are the middle income country, I mean, in terms of one man's definition. Forget about low, middle, and high middle. I think what is meant is high middle income. But in fact, Bangladesh's goal is not in terms of official goal, is not in terms of high income or low income. It's in terms of becoming a developed country. It's almost as big as saying that we have socialism in our constitution. We want to promote socialism. Nobody knows exactly what is a developed country and what is a socialist country. That is where research is needed. That is where governments in many countries claim themselves to aim to be developed, to aim to be more equitable. But I think research should be directed in the time has come to the research about what development means. This is a new question which is being asked in the developed West, because the present system of what is called now not capitalism but hyper-capitalism with extreme wealth concentration. That's even economists in the West are saying that it's not a viable system, or neither it's a desirable system. So no more we can really have a set a goal that we want to be like them, because they are themselves defining their goal of what they should become. And that's why I think we should all go back to our drawing board, looking at what GDP means, which GDP includes all sorts of even activities which are completely not only unproductive but also rent-seeking. It sits into GDP because I know how GDP is calculated, at least in Bangladesh, even in India. Many of the rent-seeking activities go indirectly into GDP. And we should think about what progress is. Particularly, I would like to say that if development, economic growth, particularly growth, which has a definition in terms of GDP, if we as economists don't think about values, morality, and other things, but if the process of economic growth itself damages our moral values, then as economists, we have a moral responsibility to go back and ask our revalue our goals of development. I think this because there is a new generation of economists here, and I think a lot of research would be directed in that direction. What we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Mahmood. Thank you, Professor Susan. I think we have an excellent session, 1 meeting session. And with this, we'd like to conclude this session. Well, our next session will start in 40 minutes from now. We will make a little bit of time adjustment. So lunch is served outside. Please join us at the lunch. Thank you.